Alright, so in the last videos, we discussed the basic ideas of organic chemistry. We briefly discussed alkanes and alkenes, and we also looked at the general characteristics of the homologous series. Now, in this part, we're going to be formally starting the alkene subtopic, and let's look at the general idea. So, in the last video, we say that alkanes are saturated hydrocarbons. And what does saturated means? This means that it has a single bond, okay, which has a carbon carbon single bond and a carbon hydrogen single bond. Okay, so this saturated thing comes or arises from the single bond. Okay, and if I draw a structure for an alkane, this is going to look something like this. Okay, so this is a CH4, which is a methane, and part of an alkane series. Okay, so this is something, a basic structure of an alkane. Now let's look at the idea, something that we discussed back in the homologous series, and that was the general formula. So what does the general formula actually mean? So if I write down the general formula for alkene, it's going to look something like this. Now, what you also need to know, just like every individual homologous series like alkane, alkenes, and the other three has the same characteristics within its series, the same way it has the same general formula within its series, but it's going to be different. Of course, individually it's going to be different, but in the same series it's going to be the same. So for example, alkane has this general formula, while alkenes has this general formula. This is for alkene, and this is common for all alkenes, and this is common for all alkanes. So this is just a bit of differentiation. Okay, so let's say if okay, so what you need to know, of course, is that here the n represents number of carbon atoms. Okay, and so if I say that you have, let's say the n is equals to 1, what that means is that the number of carbon atoms is going to be 1 and the number of hydrogens is going to be 4. Now how do we figure out this part? How do we figure out that the number of hydrogen atoms are going to be 4, or how do we figure out the complete molecular formula for this? And this is done with the help of this general formula, and I'll tell you how. So let's say we have something, let's say the value of n is given as 2. Now to figure this out, what we will do is that we will see the formula, which is CnH2n plus 2, and we'll plug this value of n in place of the n in the formula. Okay, so this is C2, and this becomes H2 multiplied by 2 plus 2. So this becomes C2, this becomes 4, and 4 plus 2 becomes 6. So this is C2H6. So this is how, with the help of formula, we figured out the complete molecular structure of an alkane molecule. So let's say if I had the value of n is 3, what then? Again, we'll follow the same formula. So the formula was CnH2n plus 2, and in place of this n, we'll place this 3. So this is C3H2 plus 2. So this becomes C3, this becomes 6, and 6 plus 2 is 8. And this is how, again, we figure out the formula. Okay, so this is how the general formula works for alkene. Now let's do some practice examples. Okay, so in the question number 1, it says a compound has 2 carbon atoms. What's the molecular formula? So if someone says let's just mark this question number 1. If someone says that the compound has 2 carbon atoms, now what did we say? That the carbon atoms, number of carbon atoms, will be denoted by the number n. So in this case, the number of carbon atoms are 2. And if we look at the formula, which is CnH2n plus 2, we'll place this 2 in place of the both n's. So this becomes C2H2 2 plus 2, and this is C2, this becomes 4, and plus 2 is 6, so this is C2H6. So now we figured out the molecular formula, which is C2 H6. Let's look at question number 2. Question number 2 says, what is the formula of an alkene with 5 carbon atoms? Now what changed here is that the number of carbon atoms become 5. So it's the same thing, CnH2n plus 2. The same formula is applied, 5 in place of n. So C5H2, 5 plus 2. So this is C5, this becomes 10 and this becomes 12. So C5H12. Okay. Now in question number 3 it says an alkane contains 10 carbon atoms. Okay, so now the value of n becomes 10 and it is asking you find the number of hydrogen atoms. Okay, I think it's pretty easy again. The same formula gets applied. So this is C10, this is H2 multiplied by 10 plus 2. So this is C10, this becomes 20 plus 2 becomes 22. So the molecular formula is this and the number of hydrogen atoms are 22. So we'll write 22 here because it asks you specifically for the hydrogen atoms. Okay, let's look at question number 4. Question number 4 says how many hydrogen atoms in C7H16? How many hydrogen atoms? Already told you how many hydrogen atoms are there. This is 16 hydrogen atoms. Okay. So as question number 5 it is saying is C4H10 an alkane molecule. Okay, let's see. Is C4H10 an alkane molecule? Now what you need to realize here, you were given the values of n, so that means you were given the number of carbon atoms. Here, even though you are given the number of carbon atoms, it is now asking you to tell them if this particular molecular structure or formula is an alkane or not, and how we're going to figure out through the formula. So let's apply the formula again. So CnH2n plus 2, we know the value of carbon is 4, so the n becomes 4. So this is C4H2, 4 plus 2. So this is C4, this is 8 and this is 10. So yes, since it has satisfied the formula, we can call this as C4H10, which means the answer is yes. Okay, let's look at question number 5. Question number 5 says, is C4H8 an alkane molecule? So we just did that the C4H10 is an alkane molecule. So C4H8 cannot be an alkane molecule. And why is that? Because if you put the number of NOs, if you put the number of carbon atoms as 4 in this formula, so we saw that putting 4 carbon atoms in this formula brings out 10 hydrogen. So this is the formula that is getting satisfied, which means here the answer is going to be no. So we'll write a no. Okay, let's look at the last question. The last question says, which of the following is not an alkane? Okay, let's see the first one. So this is C2H8. Now again, we know the formula and the formula is CnH2n plus 2. Here it is asking you to identify whether this compound is an alkane or not. So the value of n is 2. So what we will do is place in front of the n, or in place of the n, sorry. So this is 2 plus 2. So this is C2, this becomes 4 and plus 2 becomes 6. So the answer is C2H6, not C2H8, which means this is not an alkane and this is what it asks you. So this is the answer. And you don't need to check the others because you've got the answer in the first place. So this is how you figure out the general formula, and these were some practice examples for that. Okay, cool.